Persistent trip. On August 14, 2012, a user named Amos No More uploaded a video titled Persistent Trip, Datura. The video, just over 2 minutes long, shows a young man in disarray alone in his room talking directly into the camera. He opens by giving the recording date, March 5, 2008, and immediately begins recounting a disturbing experience with a hallucinogenic drug. According to him, he's been stuck in an unending trip for over 2 months by the time this footage was recorded, and he claims his symptoms haven't shown any signs of improvement.
It's March 5th, 2008. Don't seem to be coming down. It's been about 2 months. I can't really go out. I've been spending a lot of time in the basement. I don't think it's wearing off. I don't really know.
He explains he followed instructions from a book precisely, yet has no idea how to escape this nightmare. But it's not just the contents of this video that are unsettling, it's how the video came to be uploaded that makes it all the more eerie. The video's description reads, "This video was uploaded to YouTube several years ago and I haven't been able to find it recently. As I recall, the uploader claimed it was found footage. He said he found a tape on a park bench or something and was concerned about the person depicted therein." And just a few months later, another user by the name of Dizzy Duck uploaded the same video in December of 2012 with the title Endless Trip Video. The description of this second upload more or less aligns with what was mentioned in the first description, with the added information that the original footage was supposedly found somewhere in Philadelphia. Dizzy Duck also points out something disturbing, what looks like a revolver or some kind of gun on a shelf behind the man's left shoulder. Unfortunately, the resolution of both of these uploads is too low for me to identify it as a gun with certainty. But if it is, this would give this already cryptic video a very dark undertone. What really gets me though is the mystery surrounding it. Despite supposedly being over 14 years old and having over 400,000 views on one of its re-uploads, there's almost no credible information out there. The only other reference I found is this Reddit thread on r/videos from 11 years ago. However, even the original poster of this thread has since deleted their account. So, what's the deal with this video? Is it real or just an elaborate hoax? First, let's assume that all the known details surrounding the video are real, from what the person in the video is saying to what's mentioned in the description. The person in the video is clearly very stressed out, and while he's not going crazy in the traditional sense, his body language, refusal to make eye contact with the camera, and overall demeanor shows that he clearly wasn't 100% there when recording.
I think I boiled the roots right. I did what it said in the book. I don't feel like I'm ever gonna come down. And it's not cool.
Amos, in his re-upload, suggests the substance causing this bad trip might be Datura, a highly toxic plant that can act as a hallucinogen in small doses. However, this is likely not the case for two major reasons. For starters, Datura is a deliriant with the disturbing nickname of Devil's Trumpets. This is because the trips caused by Datura are extremely painful and often lead to bizarre and violent behavior. The person who recorded this video is far too composed to be under the influence of such a strong substance. Secondly, he also talks about boiling some roots to prepare whatever drug he took. Datura, on the other hand, is usually consumed through its leaves or seeds, not the roots. I think a more likely substance he could have used is ayahuasca, which is traditionally made by boiling roots and has effects mild enough that someone could record a video while under its influence. However, regardless of whichever drug he used, tripping for 2 straight months is simply not possible, and here's why. Almost all drugs wear off as soon as they're metabolized or leave the body. Then there's also the question that if he's been down in the basement for 2 months, how's he getting food or making money? Considering these signs, it's likely that he was tripping, but not for 2 months, just a few hours. Many people in the comments of the original video have pointed to the phenomenon where a trip feels like it lasted for way longer than it actually did. though another likely explanation could be mental illness as well. There is a high likelihood that whichever substance he used caused brain damage and led to schizophrenia, making him unable to tell reality from hallucination. There's also the possibility of hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, which causes a person to experience visual effects that last long after the drug is worn off. However, those effects are usually more like static or blurriness, not full-blown trips. Even so, all of this depends on the assumption that available information surrounding this mystery is true. For all we know, this could be nothing more than a hoax, especially since the mention of this being found footage sounds rather fishy. This whole thing could have been created by the uploader Amos No More for Internet Cloud. Dizzy Duck's re-upload could be just another move by Amos to build on the found footage storyline. But it's been over 12 years since this upload, and he hasn't done any follow-ups to capitalize on the few 100,000 views it's received. Of course, there's also a middle ground theory. Maybe the original video was real and the guy in it genuinely thought he was tripping for 2 months. Amos might have stumbled across the initial post before it disappeared and then decided to create a hoax based on it. Unfortunately, given the sparse amount of information I found, it's impossible to nail down the truth. In the off chance everything was real, I hope the person in the video found the help he needed and is doing much better today. Poorly Planned Comics. Poorly Planned Comics was a series of webcomics by a person named Jack Masters. And while the original website has long been taken down from the internet, there are still archives capturing how it looked back then. As I went through these archives, the first thing that hit me was the surreal art style and the constant fourth wall breaking humor. Even in the very first comic on the website, the characters joke about the camera being zoomed in too close. And this was only the beginning. Over the course of their run, Jack published hundreds of comics featuring countless unique characters and mind-bending, maze-like storylines. The contents of these comics also range from bizarre to downright disturbing. Like this one comic titled, "The Entire Universe Falls Apart." In it, the characters slowly realize that their universe isn't real, causing everything around them to collapse. Panels break down, dialogue turns into nonsense, and nothing makes sense anymore. The comic ends with one of the characters stating, "Alright, I give up. It was all a dream, it was all a dream." However, sandwiched between all this mysterious and chaotic artwork, there's a moment of pause where Jack includes something extremely introspective and philosophical. It reads, "The sad and obvious truth of the matter is that art, once formalized or mechanized, is no longer art, and the few arts that have not been formalized are now being mechanized. There is no mystery or talent required to create artistic beauty. And if a talentless person can do it, why should we give any regard to those who require talent to produce the same result? John may spend a week painting a tree, but Jane will take a photograph and then use a workshop program to make the picture appear painted. There is no visual art creation before the last century that modern technology would not have allowed a less talented person to make better and faster. Let us be realistic and assume this trend will continue. There is nothing we can do to avoid the solemn fact that Michelangelos are no longer needed." These kinds of intellectual reflections were sprinkled throughout his comics. However, the creation of these comics was abruptly cut short when Jack posted a strip simply titled, "The End." This was a final note from Jack before he ended his life, starting with the statement, "If you are reading this, I am dead." The rest of the comic listed his will for his various possessions, both physical and digital. Below the comic, there was also a personal reminder Jack had left for himself listing things he needed to do. However, the most mysterious part of the comic was this: a link that explained why Jack did this. Clicking on this link led to an archive of thousands of emails between Jack and various people, including friends and what seemed like an online therapist. These emails are in no particular order and have absolutely zero organization. So, as you might imagine, going through them is a long and arduous task. Unlike other internet mysteries where there's barely any information, here there's almost too much, more than any one person could easily go through. I went through as much as I could, and one thing became extremely clear. Jack was struggling with severe mental illness. That much was already clear from his comics, but going through these emails gave me a good idea of the exact illness Jack was dealing with. For starters, Jack had extreme schizophrenia, which led him to having extremely violent and disturbing thoughts. In one of his emails, he stated, "I'm full of seething, boiling hatred pain, and the only reason I'm not going out killing people right now is that I'm lucid enough not to want to deal with the consequences of such behavior." In addition to this, Jack also had dissociative identity disorder, or DID for short. This is evident from his constant mentions of a person named Susie, which he referred to as his best friend and better companion than no one. But I'm certain Susie is not a real person because in one email, Jack mentions how he feels something slipping away and Susie taking control. In another email, he also linked to a clip of the character Ben Chang from the TV show Community, where Ben Chang talks to his alternate personality. Jack also used the name Simon Sane in these emails. Looking up this name online, I found a YouTube channel with a 4+ hour stream of him talking to himself in 2 different voices while tripping on LSD.
Don't do it. That's my advice to everyone. Don't be polite.
I think there may be an overgeneralization.
Well, whatever. Okay, so...
This theory of Jack's complex mental state was pretty much confirmed by the comment that first brought this mystery to light in the first place. In December 2016, someone on r/AskReddit asked about the creepiest things on the internet. In response to this, a user named Jess248 posted a link to the original Poorly Planned Comics website and also shared a personal anecdote about Jack, stating, "Might not be the creepiest, but I can handle a lot of disturbing things. This one got to me. A childhood friend of my husband's. The guy was insanely brilliant, literally. Husband lost touch over the years. These were his comics. The very last one was his self-assassination note. They had the memorial at his condo. He had blocked out all the windows and wrote in Sharpie all over the walls. It was his breakdown, trying to find meaning before he took his life. One of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen." And while everything that I've covered so far might seem like a lot, it's only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the amount of comics, emails, and videos Jack left behind. Not to mention things that aren't explicitly stated in his work, like his obsession with the 1985 book called Maze. Maybe one day, people on the internet will finally comb through everything and complete Jack's story. Jack froze emails. In November of 2011, Tim Hart was sitting on his couch surfing the web on his laptop when out of nowhere he received a mysterious email that left him in complete disbelief. The email read, "I'm watching. Did you hear me? I'm at your house. Clean your attic." Now, receiving an email like this would make most people think that they were either the target of a prank or had a stalker lurking nearby. But for Tim, both of these possibilities were completely out of the question because the email came from his friend Jack Froze, who had died about 5 months earlier. What made this particularly convincing was the bit about cleaning the attic. Just weeks before Jack's death, he visited Tim's attic and they joked about what a mess it was. And while Tim was still trying to figure things out, Jack's cousin, Jimmy McGraw, also received an email from Jack a few days later. However, this one was even more mysterious than the last one, reading, "Hey Jim, how you doing? I knew you were gonna break your ankle, tried to warn you. Gotta be careful. Tell Rock for me. Great song, huh? You're welcome." Couldn't get through to him, his email didn't work. Now, the simplest explanation for these emails is that Jack had scheduled them to be sent before he passed away. However, this theory has 2 major flaws. You see, Jack died of heart arrhythmia, a condition where electrical signals that tell the heart to beat don't work properly. This happens mostly out of nowhere, and there's no reliable way to predict this ahead of time. In other words, Jack had no way of knowing that he was going to die, which would have prompted him to schedule these emails. Secondly, while it can't explain the email Tim received since the 2 talked about his dirty attic before Jack's death, there's no way to rationalize the email Jimmy received. He sprained his ankle about 2 weeks before receiving the email, which was nearly 5 months after Jack's death. So, unless Jack had the superpower of future sight, he couldn't have possibly predicted such an unlikely event for his scheduled email. This leads us to the second theory, one that the recipients themselves preferred to believe, that this was Jack's reaching out to them one last time from beyond the grave.
I would like to say Jack sent it, just because I look at it as he's gone, but he's still trying to connect with me and still trying to tell me things to move along and feel better.
However, while it's comforting to imagine that those who have left this world can still watch over their loved ones, this is by far the least likely explanation for these emails, especially compared to the possibility that someone close to both Tim and Jimmy had access to Jack's email account. This also explains the inclusion of recent events like Jimmy's ankle injury in the emails. Another thing I noticed while looking into this incident is that Jack's name is spelled incorrectly in the signature of both emails. It should be F-R-O-E-S-E, not F-O-R-S-E. If Jack was the one who wrote these emails, either before or after his death somehow, then why would he spell his own name incorrectly, twice? Ultimately, Tim and Jimmy had a real shot at finding the real sender if they really wanted to. But now, 13 years later, there's little hope we'll ever learn the truth. Grateful Doe Hitchhiker. On June 26, 1995, at around 1:30 p.m., Virginia State Police responded to the report of a car crash near the small town of Emporia, Virginia. The Volkswagen Vanagon involved in the incident was completely wrecked from the front due to a collision with roadside trees. And since neither of the two passengers were wearing a seatbelt, both of them were partially ejected from the front windshield and were deceased by the time police arrived. One of the victims of this crash was quickly identified as 21-year-old Michael Hager, a student at the University of South Carolina. However, every effort to identify the second guy proved entirely fruitless. His face was heavily disfigured during the crash, and he didn't have an ID on him either. Police were also unable to find any matching fingerprints in their database. Michael's family also had no idea who the second person was. Curiously, both Michael and this unknown person were wearing the same tie-dye t-shirt with the logo of the Grateful Dead rock band. After searching the bodies, police found 2 disheveled tickets for the Grateful Dead concert that took place a day prior in DC. They also found a handwritten note which stated, "Jason, sorry we had to go. See you around. Call me. Caroline T and Caroline O. Bye." Further investigation led to the conclusion that this unknown rider was simply hitchhiking. The two likely met at the concert and became friends. As for the crash, the police determined that it was simply caused by the driver falling asleep at the wheel. But that wasn't all. The only 2 things police knew about the unidentifiable man were that he was a fan of the Grateful Dead and that his name was likely Jason, as was written on the note. Jason was declared as John Doe, which is a name given to a person whose real name is unknown. And due to the Grateful Dead shirt he was wearing, Jason became known as the Grateful Doe. However, they were unable to find any more information on him, and the case was closed after some time. That is until 2012, when the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children published a digital recreation of Jason's face. This attracted the attention of internet detectives who became interested in identifying this person some 17 years after the original incident. A notable person who got involved in the case was the Reddit user Zombie Gray. Zombie began scouring the internet for any useful information they could find, and also founded a subreddit solely dedicated to finding the real identity of Jason. Zombie also created this missing person poster of sorts for Jason, which included all of the available information as well as a link to contact Zombie. The poster had a catchy title which read, "Can you help give him back his name?" Surprisingly, this poster went super viral across all social media sites and finally led to a breakthrough. A while after the poster was published, a man named Steve contacted Zombie and claimed that he knew who Jason was. According to Steve, his full name was Jason Callahan. Now the only thing left to find was any living family members of Jason. Fortunately, that didn't take long. In January of 2015, the following was posted after seeing the missing person poster on Facebook. "OMG, this is my son Jason Callahan from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I've been looking for him all this time with no luck. Today, my other son saw this Facebook page, and after all the years of praying for him to just call me or come home." Apparently, Jason had left his home when he turned 18 and was traveling around the country on his own. All this time, his mother thought that Jason was dodging her calls and simply didn't want to return home. With that, after 2 decades, one of the most mysterious John Doe cases was solved. Though it is sad to think about his mother, who thought that her son was alive, only to learn about his death through the internet 20 years later. Indianapolis Wrecking Ball Theft. In the 1970s, newspapers in the Indianapolis region reported the most bizarre theft. Someone had apparently stolen an entire wrecking ball without getting caught. This became a big mystery at the time, and it's still a mystery today, nearly 50 years later. So, what happened? How could something as massive and heavy as a wrecking ball vanish overnight? Before we get to that, it's important to mention that the facts surrounding this mysterious theft are very inconsistent. Some sources claim that the ball was 5 tons and 200 feet in the air. Other sources say that the ball was only half that weight at 2.5 tons. There's also a mystery surrounding the date of when this event happened. A newspaper report I found on the incident was from July of 1973. However, a Redditor found the mention of this mystery in a book which listed the date as 1974 instead. This book also listed the weight as 2.5 tons instead of the 5 tons mentioned in the newspaper, adding further confusion. This might not sound like a big deal, but a difference of 2.5 tons can make a wrecking ball much easier to steal with a truck and a well thought out plan. The bigger question, however, is why? As the 1973 newspaper states, "I can't figure out what someone would do with a 5-ton metal ball." Well, there are a few prevalent theories online. One of these theories speculates that this was the work of a rival company, which is just cartoonishly evil enough to be true. But the thing is, melting the wrecking ball to sell the steel would have been too expensive, and it's highly unlikely that they had a crane lying around to use with the stolen wrecking ball. So, if this theory is true, the only plausible explanation is that they stole the ball to slow down their rivals' work and cause financial trouble. This also checks out since, according to the 1973 newspaper article, the ball was stolen during a demolition job. That said, there's also another theory that is also a bit out there, but can make perfect sense if we had more information regarding the finances of the company the ball was stolen from. According to this theory, the company stole its own wrecking ball and hid it somewhere as a form of insurance fraud. Also, while researching this topic, I came across a similar incident that happened in Dallas, Texas in 1978. If the wrecking ball theft in Indianapolis was truly for insurance fraud, maybe a demolition business owner in Dallas saw its success and decided to do the same. Overall, because this happened so long ago and there's very inconsistent information on it, we'll likely never know what happened to this disappearing wrecking ball. On the morning of January 2nd, 1978, a woman in California received a call asking for someone named Ray. She didn't know anyone by that name, so she simply told the caller they had the wrong number and hung up. Back then, callers had to manually enter each digit of the number they wanted to call in a rotary phone, and accidentally entering the wrong number was a common mistake. So, she didn't think much of this and moved on with her day. However, things took a horrifying turn that evening when she received another call from the same person, and what she heard on the other end of this audio call was extremely disturbing.
Hello? Hello?
The man who was politely asking to speak with someone named Ray earlier was now threatening to end her life. What's worse is that this audio call wasn't a baseless threat or a troll. The person calling was later found out to be the Golden State Killer, one of the most infamous serial killers in US history. He terrorized California for over a decade from 1974 to 1986 and operated across multiple counties, including Sacramento, Ventura, Santa Barbara, and Orange County. What made him more terrifying than most other serial killers was just how precise and thorough he was. Instead of committing the crime whenever he got the chance, he would often plan months in advance. He would stalk his victims, learning everything about their daily lives and routines to find the right opportunity. This also included surveying the area around their home to plan escape routes. Sometimes he would break into his victims' homes beforehand to unlock windows, unload guns, and plant the gear he was later going to use for the crime. He would also call his future victims many times leading up to the crime and threaten them, similar to the call you heard earlier. This was all a part of his act, with these calls serving as a way for him to mentally torment his victims ahead of time. When he eventually broke into their home for the last time, he would often tie them up and make himself at home, even cooking in their kitchen on occasion. Put simply, he was extremely confident in his planning, and unfortunately it worked. By the end of 1986, he had broken into different homes over 120 times, and in more than 64 victims, 3 of which were children. However, despite the authorities having tons of evidence against him, like fingerprints, footprints, masks, multiple rings, and many different sketches from witnesses, nothing led to a name. He would even call and taunt the police and families of his victims, daring them to catch him. But despite all this, the case remained cold for over 40 years. That is, until the late 2010s, when a new kind of detective work changed everything. You see, investigators already had plenty of DNA evidence from the killer. However, his DNA didn't match the limited samples they had in their database. But in 2016, a very distant relative of the Golden State Killer took a DNA ancestry test through one of the companies like 23andMe. The DNA data from this company was aggregated by a company called GED Match. And the FBI then used this extensive database to see if any of the samples matched with the DNA evidence they had. While they didn't find the killer, they did find a match with one of his very distant relatives. This allowed them to go through the whole family tree with over 1,000 members and eventually find the person they were looking for. After 40 long years, the identity of the man behind this creepy call was finally made public. On April 24, 2018, authorities arrested then 73-year-old Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer. He was a Vietnam War veteran and an ex-police officer from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office. Investigation of his past also revealed a chilling instance from July 1979 when he was arrested for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent. In hindsight, it's obvious that he was going to use both of these items for one of his crimes. And the reason he tried to steal them instead of paying was because he didn't want the sale tied back to his name in any way. In July of 2020, Joseph pled guilty to 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnapping in a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. He was given 13 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and is now serving his time at a California state prison. The recorded audio calls he made to his soon-to-be victims have gone down as some of the most disturbing pieces of audio ever recorded. On the 1st of December 2017, Reddit user Drudagon17 made a Reddit post hoping to find an explanation for the terrifying screams he heard while on vacation. What's causing these screams? So, I'm not really sure what this is. I've had a lot of people tell me different things, but no one really knows for sure. Maybe someone here could help me shed some light. Alongside this, he linked to a recording of what sounded like a person screaming at the top of their lungs. The OP then went into detail describing the circumstances surrounding these disturbing noises, reading, "Earlier in the year, I went on a long road trip across the states, mainly visiting the national parks and a few cities along the way. Towards the end of the trip, we found ourselves staying in the small town of West Yellowstone. This appeared to be an ideal base whilst we explored Yellowstone National Park. We booked into a pretty creepy but cheap motel just off the main street for a couple of nights. Me and my fiancé had one room, my parents another. On the first morning there, we planned to get up early, catch the sunrise, and hopefully spot some of the local wildlife. So our alarms were set for 5 a.m. At about 4:45 a.m., I was woken by loud banging on the door, followed by crying and shouting. I instantly jumped out of my bed thinking the worst had happened. I opened the door to my mom in a state of panic, saying, "There's someone screaming, a woman screaming." There, clear as day, I could hear a woman screaming. It sounded as though it was within 100 feet of us. Mom claimed it had been happening for the last 30 minutes. We wanted to call the police but had no phone signal, no phones in the rooms, and we were the only people about. This on its own is pretty terrifying, but what made this encounter even more unnerving was what happened next, with the OP and his family having a very bizarre interaction with local law enforcement, stating, "Then, after I'd been hearing the scream for about half an hour, so roughly an hour since it started, a police officer seemed to appear out of nowhere. He started to ask questions about what we were doing and why we were up. We thought he'd come about the scream, so we quickly told him everything. He then heard the scream and sped off towards town. The screaming got less frequent and eventually stopped, so we decided to go about our day. We saw all the lovely sights of Yellowstone and even showed several park rangers the video to see if it's an animal. They all said they've not heard anything like it before. So when we got back into town that evening, we stopped into the sheriff's office to try and get some information. This was met with a lot of hostility from both the lady at reception, who eventually closed the shutter in our face, and the same officer we had seen that morning. They both said exactly the same thing. It almost sounded like a script. "Sorry ma'am, but that was an intoxicated woman yelling for her boyfriend." I don't quite understand how they can put that down to someone shouting at their boyfriend. I get people get really wasted, but not to the point where you just scream and never say any words. So, what was the source of the disturbing screaming Drudagon heard that night? The most prevalent theory I've come across is that these noises were coming from an animal, more specifically a mountain lion. This makes a lot of sense since mountain lions are native to the Yellowstone wilderness. More importantly, their screams are eerily similar to what the OP heard during his stay in that area. That said, it's still possible that the police officers were telling the truth, and that these screams were coming from an intoxicated woman. The pitch of the second scream in the OP's recording in particular is a lot more human-like than something coming from an animal. One person on YouTube even tried to explain this uncanny difference, stating that the first round of screaming sounds like it's coming from a mountain lion, and the second time sounds like a person screaming back at the animal. Maybe they were just annoyed and were trying to scare away the animal or get it to shut up. While this could have been the case, most of the screaming noises OP heard were likely coming from a mountain lion, since according to his post, he didn't hear any cries for help or other words in these noises. Even if it were coming from a highly intoxicated woman, it's safe to assume that she would say something aside from just yelling at the top of her lungs. But if that's true, why did two different police officers tell the same lie? Some people speculated that they did so just to avoid scaring off tourists, or that they were just pulling a prank. But from what I've seen, Drudagon was most likely lying about this part of his story. It's entirely possible that after learning about the surprisingly normal origin of these creepy noises, the OP used this encounter to craft a disturbing story they could post on Reddit. Especially since at one point during his original post, he mentions showing the recording to multiple park rangers. Now, even if these rangers weren't 100% positive, they would still make the obvious connection with the similar animal noise that's common in that region. Drudagon also mentioned looking it up on YouTube and not finding any videos that could explain the disturbing screams. Even though when searching "screaming in Yellowstone" on YouTube, one of the first results is a 9-year-old video showcasing a mountain lion scream. That being said, it's been over 7 years since the original post, and Drudagon hasn't posted any updates since. So whether this was a mountain lion or something else more disturbing, we'll likely never know the truth with 100% certainty. In February 2016, the residents of Forest Grove, Oregon began hearing a strange, high-pitched noise in the area. This eerie noise was limited to the city of Forest Grove and the wilderness surrounding it. It could only be heard for a few minutes at a time. It would begin blaring randomly throughout the day and often late into the night before going away for a few hours. One of the most disturbing aspects of this noise was how quickly it spread to the entire city. Its tone was deeply uncomfortable, resulting in a lot of people calling the police in distress.
It's happened twice tonight. It's happened about 5 times during the last 7 days, and the neighbor beside me, we can't even hear each other in the backyard. Neither one of us can figure out what's happening.
Throughout that February, emergency services received over 200 calls from concerned citizens, some even reporting physical symptoms from hearing the noise. But one question was on everyone's mind: where was this screeching noise coming from? One of the first theories that came up was that the noise was coming from a gas leak, something that could possibly be that loud. However, the Northwest Natural Gas Company quickly shut down this idea, stating that if there was a gas leak, they would have become aware of it already. Also, a gas leak sounds more like a jet taking off rather than the screeching sound reported. On top of that, they pointed out that if there was a gas leak big enough to cause this much noise, the smell of the leaking gas would spread throughout the city as well. Another theory that came up was that this was the result of trapped air and sewer lines escaping through a manhole. However, a major flaw in this theory was that if it were true, why did the noise only begin in February of 2016? The fire marshal, on the other hand, suggested the idea that it might be coming from someone's faulty air conditioning system. This is because many dysfunctional systems emit a very high-frequency sound, similar to what the residents of Forest Grove were hearing. The truth is, this noise could have been coming from any number of sources, including construction equipment or a broken emergency siren. Unfortunately, the sound appeared to be coming from all directions, making it pretty much impossible to find its origin and verify any of these theories. While everyone was desperately trying to figure things out, the daily noise was becoming more and more unsettling with each passing day. But the eerie noise then suddenly disappeared just as quickly as it had begun. Over 9 years later, and this strange noise is still an unsolved mystery. That said, I believe the most likely theory is also the most boring one, that this whole thing was a prank or hoax by someone with a horn of some kind. You see, after getting overwhelmed by the number of calls from Forest Grove residents, the local police station began investigating the phenomenon more seriously. Amid their search, they put out a statement warning any potential pranksters, reading, "While some might find it comical, interesting, and mysterious, it's unlawful if it's being done on purpose. If this is the case, the individual caught will face possible repercussions." A couple days after this statement came out, the noise vanished and hasn't returned since. It's almost as if whoever was behind this realized that the prank was not worth the trouble and stopped. Of course, all this is just a theory on its own. But unless someone comes forward with a confession, I doubt we'll ever learn the truth about the origin of this disturbing noise. On March 2nd, 2013, an anonymous user made an entry on 4chan talking about a creepy radio hijacking they experienced as a kid. The post read, "A creepy, I think, audio file which I've always been curious about. Back in 1994/1995, when I recorded this off of the radio, I told myself I'd never make a copy of the tape, having freaked myself out. But it's been sitting in the back of a desk drawer and in the back of my mind for 16 years now, and now I'm just curious. The weird stuff starts about 16 seconds in. Around 1995, I was about 15. I used to stay up late in my room listening to the radio on a boombox with an integrated tape recorder. I'd dial through the stations, and when I heard something interesting, I'd hit record for a while and then move on. One night, I came across this. I don't think this was the beginning of the broadcast, but I caught a lot of it. Right at the end, an announcer says that the station I was tuned to was WKCR 89.9 New York. There are a bunch of names and dates in there, but I've never run into anything else like this." Alongside this was a link to an audio file that starts off quite normal with a section from a 1993 song by Billy Cobham. It then abruptly transitions into a violin section from a song called Golden Sonata by Henry Purcell. The audio then morphs into a bone-chilling, high-pitched scream of sorts. This alone is extremely creepy, but the audio doesn't stop there. Soon after this high-pitched scream, it morphs into the sound of a woman taking deep breaths. This breathing pattern repeats a few times, ultimately leading into the sound of a woman reading seemingly random names and dates in an almost whisper. This voice keeps repeating the same 9 names and dates over and over again. A little investigation shows that the names and dates are taken from their obituaries. The 2 most notable names among these belong to Frank Oppenheimer, the brother of the creator of the atomic bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer, and Barry Joseph Valentino Jr., one of the victims of the Pan Am Flight 103 bombing in 1988. However, from what I've seen, there's no correlation between any of the names besides the fact that they're all dead. After repeating these names for a few minutes, the broadcast goes back to normal with a seemingly routine call sign announcement.
You're tuned to WKCR FM New York, 89.9 on your dial. Colombian music is running a little late. It will be starting in a few minutes.
Now, when the anonymous user originally posted this on 4chan, it received mixed reactions. Some people were deeply creeped out by it, while others were skeptical and believed the OP made this whole thing up. So, what's the truth? Well, there's evidence supporting both sides of the argument. The thing is, after receiving a few requests, the OP posted the full audio clip on YouTube with a channel named Ravenmouth. Searching it on Google shows that the OP has a Reddit account by the same name. With this, we can see that a couple of weeks after his 4chan post, Ravenmouth posted the same radio hijacking story on the No Sleep subreddit, which is mainly about believable but not always true disturbing stories. Near the end of this post, Ravenmouth also added a new section that wasn't present in his 4chan post, reading, "Unfortunately, and for this I sincerely apologize, it never ever stops. I told you this was just something I'd found, and I swear to you that that's true. It really did happen that way. It's more than that though. I don't really know how long it takes. A few weeks or months from now when you're alone and suddenly you hear the keening, quavering sound rise up like it's crawling out of your spine and into your skull, you'll understand. When that night comes, if you listen closely to what comes after the horrible sound, you'll realize that the woman will be reading your name, new names. You'll play it for your friends, your family, add their names. I hope, desperately, that if I can make the list long enough, add enough names, then they'll take mine off and leave me alone. I'm sorry." This is plenty of evidence to show that this story is fictional and Ravenmouth made it all up. However, he remains adamant that while he did embellish the story a bit for the Reddit post, he still did record the audio from the radio when he was a teenager. So, could the WKCR station have actually been hijacked by someone? It's entirely possible. Radio hijackings are not a new phenomenon and were certainly a thing back when this would have happened. But WKCR is owned by a college and ran almost entirely by college students. When asked about it, the WKCR team stated, "As far as we know, this did take place on WKCR airwaves. In terms of the claim that it was a hijacking, that is very unlikely. WKCR is a weird place with weird programmers, probably just some late-night new music programmer having fun on the mic." Put simply, Ravenmouth was likely telling the truth, but what he thought was a creepy hijacking was just the artsy experiment of a college student. Although this, of course, cannot be 100% confirmed. On March 1st, 1999, the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recorded an ominous sound coming from the ocean. This is what it sounds like at 16 times speed. This sound, named Julia, lasted for a whole 2 minutes and 43 seconds and was powerful enough to be detected across the entire equatorial Pacific Ocean hydrophone network. Hydrophones, for those who don't know, are basically underwater microphones. They were originally installed to detect submarines during the Cold War and were later converted to be used for general ocean research. This network became popular in 1997 when it captured multiple strange sounds coming from within the ocean, including the now iconic bloop. According to the official explanation, the sound heard in this recording was caused by ice quakes and large icebergs, or by icebergs scraping the ocean floor. Julia was recorded nearly 2 years after this one. However, unlike bloop, it doesn't have an explanation. Due to the high loudness of Julia, scientists weren't able to pinpoint its exact location. One potential solution that's been floating on the internet for a while now is that Julia originated from underwater volcanic activity. Sadly, this theory falls apart quickly upon inspection. This is mainly because there was also recorded audio coming from an underwater volcano called Upsweep, and it sounds nothing like Julia. A somewhat more interesting theory that tries to explain Julia is that the sound originates from an unknown sea creature. And while this does sound like science fiction at best, it feels a lot more feasible when you consider the fact that we're yet to explore over 80% of the ocean in detail. However, the very idea of an ocean creature big enough to produce a sound audible from thousands of kilometers away is terrifying, and honestly quite out there. The sound dubbed Julia is one of many underwater sounds recorded that have yet to be identified. In December of 2022, the authorities in Northern Ireland came across a bizarre crime scene where the most likely suspect was somehow in 2 places at once. It all started on the 18th of December when Irish YouTuber VoteSaxon07, whose real identity is 33-year-old Stephen McCullen, livestreamed himself playing GTA Vice City. The stream started at around 6 p.m. and Stephen stayed live for about 6 hours, till midnight. The stream itself was quite unremarkable, with Stephen playing the game mostly in silence, broken by his occasional commentary. Unfortunately, while he was streaming comfortably in his home, his 32-year-old girlfriend, Natalie McNally, was going through something downright horrific. Stephen, however, was completely unaware of this and promptly went to sleep after ending the stream. The next day, he woke up to a barrage of calls and messages regarding Natalie. She was apparently at her parents' house the night before to watch the World Cup finale. The match ended at around 6 p.m. and Natalie went back to her home shortly after, which wasn't too far away. She lived alone in Northern Ireland with her 2 cats and a dog. However, the next day, no one could get through to Natalie. She didn't show up to work and wasn't picking up her phone either. At the time, she was also 15 weeks pregnant with Stephen's child. So when she went silent, her friends and family grew worried, fearing she was facing some health concerns. After learning about her absence and waiting a few hours for a response, Stephen went to her home, which was about 20 minutes away from his home in Lisburn. Unfortunately, he was too late. When Stephen arrived at Natalie's home, the door was wide open. Inside, he found her lifeless on the floor. She had been killed.
Detectives from the Major Investigation Team have now launched a murder investigation following the death of Natalie McNally in Lurgan. This follows the results of the post-mortem. The 32-year-old died a violent death, having been stabbed a number of times, and there are signs of defensive injuries.
Post-mortem reports showed that she was killed on the night of December 18th, not long after she came back from her parents' home. However, investigators did not find any evidence of a forced entry into her home. This, combined with the fact that Stephen was the one who reported her death to the police, made him the lead suspect in her murder investigation, and he was arrested shortly after. However, this arrest didn't last long, because as the authorities quickly found out, Stephen had a strong alibi. According to the post-mortem report, Natalie was killed during the same time Stephen was live streaming from his home. Investigators looked through Natalie's phone and found the last text Stephen sent to her at 5:57 p.m., which read, "Right, I'm off to stream the night away, wish me luck." To which Natalie replied, "I might have a peek at your live stream later." This was enough to clear Stephen's name from any wrongdoing, but it left investigators with no clear direction on where to look next. Stephen did give them the name of someone he suspected, however, investigating that person didn't lead to any breakthrough in the case either, and the name of this person was never made public for this reason. Luckily, detectives found CCTV footage a few days later showing a man dressed in dark clothes and white shoes heading towards Natalie's home at 8:52 p.m., and then the same person going back about 40 minutes later. Given his timing, investigators determined that this was the killer. Shockingly, he had the same height and build as Stephen. This put him on the radar once again, but it also raised a valid question. If Stephen was the perpetrator, how could he be in two places at the same time? Without any other option, the authorities put a £20,000 reward for information regarding the killer and continued investigating. They also feared that by the time they started this investigation, the killer could have easily fled to any of the neighboring countries. In the meantime, Natalie's case had become national news, resulting in multiple memorials around the country. This put even more pressure on the investigators to find the killer as quickly as possible. They made several arrests and even seized the suspect's car. Investigators also found the weapon the killer used on the 5th of January 2023, which was a knife from her own home. However, none of these developments brought them any closer to identifying the killer. That is until January 31st when they arrested Stephen again, but this time with solid evidence. As it turns out, the only thing keeping him out of suspicion, the livestream, was completely fake. The whole thing was pre-recorded and broadcasted to simply look like a live stream. After his arrest, investigators went through his computer and found the original recording, which was made on the 14th of December, 4 days before the incident. They also found a taxi driver who described picking up someone matching Stephen's profile near the murder at 9:30 p.m. and then dropping this person near Stephen's house. Most importantly, according to the taxi driver, this passenger had forgotten his wallet at home, so he quickly ran inside his house to get the money. And as expected, he ran into Stephen's home. All this evidence left no doubt in the fact that Stephen was the one who went to Natalie's home to commit a predetermined crime. In hindsight, there were plenty of suspicious moments during the fake livestream that should have raised more alarms. For starters, the stream was titled The Violet Night Christmas Live Gaming Stream. At the start of the stream, Stephen also claimed that he was having technical issues with the streaming software, which he used as an excuse as to why he wouldn't be able to interact with the live chat.
Well, because this streaming software is kind of up the left, it means I can't check the live chat, which is a real shame. So, by all means, talk amongst yourselves.
This ensured that no one questioned why he wasn't talking with his viewers, which is essentially the whole point of doing a stream instead of posting a pre-recorded video. At the start of the stream, Stephen made sure to repeatedly mention what day it was.
Hello to all on this glorious Sunday evening. So I just thought, why not? I'm gonna do a live stream because this day next week is Christmas. So what more could you want for Christmas other than an evening with your old pal Stephen?
This was likely an effort to make his alibi stronger and to say, look, I was streaming the same night. I even mentioned the day at the beginning. On top of that, many moments in the stream also took on a far more disturbing meaning after the truth came out. Like him singing about killing someone in-game, which can also be interpreted as him cryptically talking about his girlfriend.
I need to kill it. I need to take her down. Cause I won't pass the mission if I don't get this to talk. Tra-la-la.
At another point during the stream, he makes a pun that sounds like Natalie's name and finds it unusually amusing.
Yeah, that's physics. That's what would happen in the real world. Absolutely. Absolutely.
The most creepy moment, however, was about halfway through the stream. While he was on break, suddenly the live stream back soon graphic switched with a poster of a James Bond movie called No Time to Die. Steven later claimed that this was an accident. He accidentally dropped his controller on the keypad, which made the strange graphic come up. But since we now know that the live stream was pre-recorded, Steven deliberately included this graphic at this point during the editing, likely alluding to the crime he was going to commit on that day. This theory becomes even more credible once you consider the fact that this movie poster came up at about 9:15 p.m., which perfectly aligns with the time he was at Natalie's house committing the brutal crime. That said, his clever schemes were derailed and he was charged with murder. He was also refused bail. And at the time of writing, he's awaiting trial on May 6, 2025. Hopefully, Natalie and her family can get the justice they deserve. On April 4th, 2020, Ernest Wilson went live on Facebook during a house party, without knowing that these were his final moments alive. Ernest was a 24-year-old warehouse worker living in Baltimore, Maryland. The only passion he had in life was for partying, playing board games, and turning them into drinking games. Unfortunately, the 2020 pandemic and the subsequent lockdown closed every public venue he frequented. So he decided to take matters in his own hands and came up with a solid plan. He would rent Airbnbs, host an invite-only party which he referred to as a game night with a fee to cover the expenses, and have a good time with his friends. These parties started off small but quickly grew in numbers as more and more people became aware of them. And on April 3rd, he went onto Facebook to plan another party that weekend, asking, "Should I do game nights again this weekend?" And, "We playing hide and seek at game night tonight?" After receiving enough confirmations, he decided to go ahead with the plans and announced a 2-day game night with free entry for girls and a $5 fee for the guys. Not long after this announcement, he also made a post about bringing uninvited people, stating, "Please don't show up with nobody I didn't personally invite if we didn't discuss it first. They're going to get left outside." Maybe he had experienced problems with uninvited guests at past events. Or maybe he simply wanted to know the exact number of attendees ahead of time. But in hindsight, his concern makes a lot more sense. As the night approached, Ernest started the event, and it went just as well as he could have hoped, with everyone dancing and having a good time. That is until 2:30 a.m. when the group decided to play the hide-and-seek game they discussed earlier. Ernest took charge as the first seeker and began a countdown at the Airbnb's backyard.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
However, as soon as he began searching for his friends, he stumbled upon something completely unexpected.
1, 2, 3. Who the f is that, G?
I don't know.
Get your on the other side of this gate. Who the f? This can't be one of my friends.
He saw someone trying to jump the fence and break into the property. Now, the correct response would have been to go back inside to safety and call the cops on this intruder. However, Ernest was already a bit under the influence at the time and made the biggest mistake of his life. He decided to confront the man on his own, and that's when things took a turn. The intruder was armed, and after some back and forth, tragically shot Ernest before fleeing the scene, all of which could be heard on the live stream. The police arrived at the property at 2:45 a.m. where they found Ernest lying in a pool of his own blood. According to the few statements that were released to the public, this appeared to be a case of a robbery gone wrong. However, some believe there was more to the story. This is because during Ernest's struggle with the intruder, a girl can be heard laughing in the background. As the story goes, this girl was an accomplice of the intruder who planned to either rob the place or eliminate Ernest for some reason, with one person on YouTube writing, "That girl tried to let someone in the front door, or she knew who tried coming through the door. Once discovering it was locked, she told them to hop the fence as clear as day. I would start with her boyfriend." Unfortunately, from what I can find, the police never caught the suspect, and Ernest's case remains open to this day. So, whatever their motive was, I doubt we'll ever know, especially 5 years later. On September 7th, 2024, a 32-year-old man by the name of Joseph Couch opened fire on vehicles traveling down I-75 near the city of London, Kentucky. He managed to hit 12 cars, injuring 5 people. Fortunately, there were no fatalities. As authorities rushed to his location, Joseph managed to escape into the wooded area alongside the highway. This left the investigators with no choice but to search the Daniel Boone National Forest, hoping to find the mass shooter. In the meantime, they also began looking into Joseph's past and made some chilling discoveries. He served in the Army Reserve from 2013 to 2019 before receiving an honorable discharge due to him developing PTSD. More importantly, this wasn't his first entanglement with law enforcement. Back in 2015, he was arrested for throwing a rock at a dog and then pointing an AR-15 at its owner. Joseph had to pay $1,000 for bail, and the case was later dismissed a few months later. However, the same year he was arrested again, this time for supplying a minor with alcohol and vandalizing private property with spray paint. This resulted in him having to spend 6 months in jail, alongside 200 hours of community service and a $1,500 fine. All of this highlighted just how mentally unstable he was. Something that became even more apparent when investigators factored in the messages he sent to his ex before the shooting. These read, "I'm going to kill a lot of people. Well, at least try. I'll kill myself afterwards." His past record and these texts also made it clear that Joseph wouldn't go down without a fight if they managed to find him. Unfortunately, the search for him wasn't progressing as smoothly as they'd hoped.
The search for the suspected highway gunman, Joseph Couch, intensifies as law enforcement has expanded its search efforts. State police say they are extending their search deeper into the Daniel Boone National Forest as the manhunt for Couch enters day 7.
Local agencies were forced to close a section of I-75 and shut down schools, fearing Joseph might strike again. Eventually, they did manage to find his SUV, which also had numerous cases of ammo for the AR-15 style rifle he used for the shooting. However, this didn't provide any clues about his current whereabouts. In a desperate measure, the authorities put a $35,000 reward for finding Joseph to enlist the help of locals. And that's where the McCoy couple entered the picture. Fred McCoy and his wife Sheila operate a museum dedicated to the historic feud between the Hatfield and McCoy families in Kentucky. They also run a small YouTube channel dedicated to this museum called Hatfield McCoy Museum Adventures, where they discuss the various aspects of that feud in greater detail. After hearing about the massive reward, the couple decided to give it a go. They had lived in the area their entire lives and knew the wilderness well.
$35,000. That's a sweet little piece of money. We're going looking for him. We're hoping he finds us, but we're going looking for this Couch guy, Joseph Couch.
They also decided to live stream their adventure through the Kentucky forest on YouTube, likely to have an instant record of whatever they find. They truly believed they could find him, and luck was on their side, because during one of their live-streamed expeditions, Fred noticed a whole bunch of vultures hovering over the same area, possibly indicating a rotting corpse nearby. The two decided to head towards the vultures, and just 30 minutes later, the McCoys found what they were looking for.
You found him? Oh, my Lanta. I'm coming. Oh, my Lanta, you found him? Oh, my Lanta.
They immediately alerted the authorities, who used DNA testing to confirm the body was indeed Joseph Couch. A later autopsy report also confirmed that he went through with the plan he talked about in his message. After 13 days of searching, the I-75 shooter mystery finally came to a close, ending the manhunt and easing the fear of Joseph still being out there. On October 28, 2019, a 47-year-old Japanese man named Tetsu Shiohara live-streamed himself climbing Mount Fuji. And what was supposed to be nothing more than a fun stream quickly turned into an avoidable tragedy. You see, Tetsu had been climbing Mount Fuji since 2017 and had already reached the summit many times. However, all of those previous expeditions were during the climbing season, which stretches from July to mid-September. And while it's not an easy task, it's far safer during these months with maintained trails, milder weather, and resting huts along the way that also sell essential supplies like food and oxygen cans. So when Tetsu decided to climb the mountain in late October, it was already covered in thick, slippery snow. And the conditions were far harsher than he could have imagined, with winds reaching up to 60 miles per hour. All of the resting spots on the mountain were also closed for the off-season. But despite this being his first off-season climb, the unfavorable conditions did not deter Tetsu. He was determined to reach the summit and make it back in a single day. Unfortunately, the stream didn't get off to a good start, as he forgot to bring essentials like thicker socks to keep his feet warm and crampons to prevent his shoes from slipping.
ソックスあ、靴下あれ靴下忘れたいや違う違うバス何がちょっと待って
Later, he also commented on how he didn't bring any food with him to avoid making his backpack too heavy. But as the climb continued, not having food became the least of his worries, as he quickly realized the snow that day was deeper than he could have imagined. On his way to the top, he passed several points where the trail had collapsed due to bad weather. About 2 hours into the hike, his viewers started to notice how dangerous things were getting as well, and began urging him to turn back before reaching the summit.
一般客だね。そうやね。そうやね。でも山頂まで行けちゃうと思うよ。この。
However, he ignored all the warning signs and pressed on with the hike. And by sheer willpower, actually managed to get close to the summit. Sadly, this is where his luck ran out. While treading through a particularly steep section of the trail, Tetsu slipped and fell down the mountainside.
外埋まってんだけど雪で。よし行こう。ここも危ないね。ちょっとね斜面。あ、滑る。
Seconds after slipping, his phone hit a rock and turned off, ending the live stream. His viewers immediately alerted the authorities. However, due to the harsh conditions, it took rescue workers 2 days to locate Tetsu's body. They found it severely dismembered, 2,300 feet below the point where he'd slipped. Now, for most people, this was an open and shut case of an inexperienced and underprepared person misjudging the dangers of Mount Fuji. But I came across some interesting theories regarding the situation. For example, one person stated, I don't think he wanted to go exactly how/where he did on the mountain, but if you ever saw the live stream, you'd know that he definitely was planning on doing it, probably at the top. The chat was begging him to turn back, and he made constant, likely deliberate references to not being fully equipped. Additionally, he had a very ample and generous amount of time to turn around if it had purely been a mistake, with the last few people he met warning him to not go any further. In other words, Tetsu intended to end everything that day. The missing equipment was a deliberate decision, not an oversight. Although there's no evidence to prove this theory, and we'll never know for sure if this was actually his intention. On the 31st of May 2022, members of several crime-related subreddits like Prison, Ex-Con, and Felon saw the same post from an account named Criminology Student. A quick glance at the post revealed that it was asking ex-convicts to take a survey, reading, Research participation needed. Hello, my name is Brian and I'm inviting you to participate in a research project that seeks to understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime. In particular, this study seeks to understand the story behind your most recent criminal offense, with an emphasis on your thoughts and feelings throughout your experience. In the event that your most recent offense was not one that led to a conviction, you may still participate. Additional surveys are included after the open-ended section as to best understand your unique traits. The study should take about 15 to 20 minutes to fully complete. This was then followed by a rather professional-sounding disclaimer from the OP, as well as his email and full name, Brian Koberger. Now, requests for surveys like this aren't exactly uncommon on these subreddits, especially from students much like Brian. But the questions in this one are a bit strange, asking things like, how did you travel to and enter the location that the crime occurred? Before making your move, how did you approach the victim or target? Before leaving, is there anything else you did? How did you leave the scene? However, the DeSales University email ID and the fact that the survey was hosted on an official-looking website suppressed any suspicion people might have had about its legitimacy. It's unclear how many people actually completed the survey, but Brian must have had some luck because he reposted the same request on many other subreddits over the next month. What none of the participants knew, however, was that this survey would end up becoming evidence for one of the worst crimes in Idaho's history. The police first became aware of the situation on November 13th, 2022 at around noon after receiving a disturbing 911 call traced to Moscow, Idaho.
911 location of your emergency. Something is happening. Something's happening in our house. We don't know what. What is the address of the emergency? 1122.
The caller was sobbing so hard she could barely explain what was happening. Then another girl grabbed the phone from her and told the dispatcher that her roommate was unconscious and not breathing. Officers rushed to the scene, expecting the worst outcome. However, nothing could have prepared them for the brutally gruesome scene they were about to walk into. The house, located on Kings Road, was the off-campus residence of several University of Idaho students. And upon arrival, the officers saw bloody remains of 4 of these students scattered throughout the house. All 4 of them had numerous lacerations and stab wounds, and had tragically already passed away by the time help arrived. According to later autopsy reports, the 4 were attacked by likely the same person at around 4 a.m. One of the surviving roommates, who later called 911, remembered seeing a masked stranger roaming around the house around that time. But she was too intoxicated to trust her own vision and passed out shortly after locking her bedroom door. Crime scene investigators arrived at the scene shortly after the police and began looking for clues. Unfortunately, the only thing they found in the house was the leather sheath of a knife under one of the victims. This finding would prove extremely important later, but at the time it did little to help investigators identify the killer. The DNA present on it, for example, wasn't in the FBI's database. Though what made the case even harder to solve was the complete lack of motive. Nothing was missing from the house, and there were no signs the perpetrator had done anything other than commit the murders. With no other option, investigators began analyzing CCTV footage from around the region. And that's when they discovered a white Hyundai Elantra speeding away from the area shortly after the estimated time of the crime. Further analysis revealed that the same car had been circling the victim's house hours before the incident. Tracking this vehicle led to 28-year-old Brian Christopher Koberger, the same Brian Koberger who had posted this survey on Reddit months earlier. He had a master's in criminal justice and was pursuing a PhD at Washington State University. That said, he had no real connections with the victims. His presence in the general vicinity of the incident wasn't strong enough evidence to issue an arrest warrant either. So the investigators looked deeper, and using his phone data confirmed that he'd visited the house many times in the past. He also turned his phone off for several hours around the same time as the incident, something he had never done in years. He likely thought that keeping his phone off would prevent law enforcement from tracking his location. But this sudden break in pattern stood out even more, giving authorities the go-ahead to arrest Brian. However, tracking him down turned out to be far more difficult than investigators had anticipated. By the time they caught on to him, he was long gone from his university. And after a weeks-long manhunt, Brian was finally located and subsequently arrested on December 30, 2022. He was found hiding in his parents' home in Pennsylvania, over 2,500 miles away from the crime scene. DNA samples taken after the arrest also matched the sample found on the knife sheath perfectly, further confirming that Brian was the one investigators were looking for. And while he kept denying the allegations at first, he eventually confessed to everything in exchange for a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. He stood trial on July 23, 2025, and was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His conviction also put his Reddit survey requests in a much different light. Brian was trying to learn how other criminals carried out their crimes and the mistakes that got them caught so the same didn't happen to him. Though, one thing that's been completely missing from any of these findings is his motive. Why would a seemingly well-adjusted man on path to a doctorate degree commit such a heinous crime, especially when he didn't even know his victims beforehand? Well, the most popular theory states that his actions were the result of a deeply unwell man developing an irrational hatred for women. You see, Brian suffered from visual snow, a condition where the patient sees black and white flickering dots all around them. The constant noise can make life difficult and cause other psychological issues, something Brian himself was well aware of. As he wrote in a Visual Snow discussion forum, "I always feel as if I'm not there, completely depersonalized. Mentally, I experience fog, lack of comprehension at some times, feel like my life is a movie, depression, no interest in activities, constant thoughts of death, anxiety, poor self-image, poor social skills, no emotions. I feel like nothing has a point to it. When I get home, I am mean to my family. This started when Visual Snow did. I felt no emotion along with the depersonalization. I can say and do whatever I want with little remorse." His irrational hatred for women also manifested in his day-to-day life. It was the primary reason he was fired from his position as a teacher's assistant, and was even caught harassing women at a brewery a few months prior. Now, most analysis of Brian's reasoning end here. But from what I've seen, his motive might have been a lot deeper and involved his admiration of infamous serial killer Ted Bundy. Brian apparently did a lot of online research about Ted Bundy, both before and after committing the crime. Investigators also found a selfie Brian took with a smile on Mount Rainier, one of the remote locations Ted Bundy often visited to commit his crimes. According to an ex-detective and crime expert, maybe he wanted to pick up where Ted Bundy left off. Fortunately, his plan wasn't as foolproof as he'd expected, allowing the authorities to put him behind bars before he could hurt any more innocent people. On June 27, 2022, a Reddit user shared an eerie voicemail they received that morning at 5:40 a.m. stating, "Okay, so I got a coded message sent to my voicemail from a blocked number. I do not talk to any old men or have any in my family. Any ideas of what this means? Please. I recently changed my phone number, but this is weird because where I bartend, we sell pizza. Do I listen to too much true crime, or is this weird?" This is the full minute-long voicemail OP received.
You should always judge pizza by the sauce, the dough, and the cheese, not by the toppings on it. Also, when ordering pizza, especially for delivery or pickup, it is not a bad idea to order it well done, as most places have a tendency to undercook it, especially when they're busy, like on a Friday night. Now that is, of course, unless you like it lightly cooked. Now, I have no interest at all in watching the Kardashians, and I never have, nor will I ever wear a backpack. And I hope this is clear to you.
The whole thing sounded like nothing but incoherent rambling on a first listen. It started with a somewhat understandable point about judging pizza from its sauce, dough, and cheese, since those are the core components of pizza. But then the advice about ordering a well-done pizza made no sense, as pizza being delivered undercooked isn't really an option. Though, the most bizarre sections of the voicemail came from after the pizza rant, where the topic suddenly jumped to watching the Kardashians, and even more strangely, wearing backpacks. How this all connected to each other was unclear. And even if it did make sense, what any of it had to do with the OP was an even bigger mystery. Not to mention the fact that this sender dialed *67 before sending the voicemail. This service allows users to hide their number for the very next call or voicemail. In other words, whoever sent this message wanted to stay anonymous. Now, one of the first working theories people on Reddit came up with was that the sender was more than likely suffering from dementia. One user even shared a personal anecdote on the matter to back this particular assessment, stating, "Sounds like someone with dementia. My grandpa would talk very much like this before he passed. At some points, he would even wake up in the middle of the night and have full-blown conversations with nobody." But while that all is a possibility, it doesn't seem very likely. Mainly because there are no pauses or stumbles between the different thoughts. It's as if the caller had rehearsed the message beforehand, or maybe even written it down before calling. Of course, this could just be a troll message with no real purpose other than to spook the OP. However, a more plausible theory gives this otherwise strange-sounding voicemail a much more sinister meaning. And it all stems from the Pizzagate controversy from back in 2016, where Democrat-led establishments, namely the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in Washington, D.C., were accused of being fronts for illegal trafficking rings. At the time, several official sources, including the Washington Police, New York Times, and the Washington Post, ensured that this was nothing more than a conspiracy with zero proof to back its claims. For instance, the accusations claimed the restaurant had a basement where underage victims were kept before being sold off. But when inspected, the building turned out to have no basement at all, let alone one big enough to facilitate a large-scale criminal operation. However, the sheer popularity of this controversy could have led to an actual uptick in using pizza-related terms as code for actual trafficking operations. So, as the theory goes, the message OP received was encoded with similar intentions and was meant for someone else. Especially with the addition of, "I hope this is clear to you" at the end, which implies a deeper meaning to those words. As one user put it, "It's some kind of coded message for a person who most definitely was not meant to be you." The "I hope this is clear to you" line, as well as it sounding like he's reading off of a prepared script, makes it seem pretty deliberate. The random mention of Kardashians and backpacks seems like another code in the midst of a weird rant about ordering pizza. Seriously, who undercooks pizza? And finally, the fact that they hid their number, it just kind of solidifies it in my mind. He either dialed the wrong number, which seems more likely as your line is already 3 years old I think you mentioned, or tried to reach the person who had your last number. Following this logic, some other users tried to decipher the code, but without the actual key, there is no way to confirm or reject any of these interpretations. For instance, the undercooked or well done parts could be a metaphor for the victim's age or their skin color. The mention of not watching the Kardashians could refer to the type of payment agreement the sender is looking for. And as one user pointed out, the Friday section could be a way to confirm the meetup date. The possibilities are truly endless. And as far as I could find, the OP never got any more messages, calls, or voicemails from this person, leaving the true meaning of this creepy, likely encoded message a complete mystery. On February 24th, 2015, Reddit user Concerned Hubs made a rather concerning post on r/legal advice. It read, "Need advice on talking to police regarding my wife. My wife has not returned home since she went out shopping late Saturday. It's getting to the point where I should call the police to file a missing persons report. I would like to be as helpful as possible when speaking to the police, but want to avoid triggering any suspicions about me. I hear a lot of stories of husbands being falsely accused when something happens. Should I only give them information in response to specific questions? Is there anything I should not bring up? I'm planning on contacting the police tomorrow morning. I can't postpone much longer as I'm getting messages asking about her and I don't want to say anything to her friends or family until I file the report first. I now realize that I should have talked to her friends and family first, but at this point I don't want to explain why I didn't file a report yet." Upon seeing this post, some people were genuinely worried for the safety of OP's wife and urged him to call the police immediately. "Jesus Christ, man, call the cops. What is wrong with you? You should have called the cops when she didn't come home Saturday." However, with every comment he replied to, it became clear that the OP was more worried about not looking suspicious to the police than about his wife's well-being. "Unless your wife is in the habit of disappearing for days at a time, what are you thinking? If I last heard from mine Saturday, I'd be totally freaking out." Well, I am totally freaking out. In addition to being concerned about my wife, I'm worried that this will snowball into something more than a missing wife case. It seems that the police can be overly suspicious in these situations. I was going to tell the police that I waited because I didn't think that they'd do anything anyway until after 48 hours have passed. Just passed that a few hours ago now. This is true, but I'm wondering if it will sound reasonable to the police. One person even suggested that the OP was just a troll, making up the whole story after watching a movie with a similar plot. But as with his other replies, the OP doubled down once again and focused more on not looking suspicious than addressing the situation itself. "This sounds a lot like Gone Girl. You trolling? If not, then you're perhaps the most irrational person to show up here in a while. If that's the case, then I hope your wife is okay. Never seen Gone Girl and am not trolling. What have I said that's irrational? I just want to avoid the situation from developing into more than it has to be." And when people tried to call him out on his twisted thinking, he started lashing out, writing things like, "Who are you to judge what a normal person would be thinking in a stressful and scary situation?" In trying so hard to not look suspicious, the OP was only making himself seem guiltier with every passing minute. This resulted in most users accusing him of taking the life of his wife and then trying to learn how to avoid suspicion with the police on Reddit. "So, where'd you hide her body? Seriously, just from this messed up post, I think you killed her. Does anyone else think OP killed her?" As soon as people started making these accusations, however, the OP suddenly changed his story and miraculously found a convenient note his wife left behind, writing, "Update, she was leaving town for a while to spend time with an old friend. I'm going to have my wife's best friend make some calls to my wife's family and friends to let them know that she's okay. Update 2, looks like I'll be talking to the police today after all. Shortly after my wife's friend contacted my father-in-law to explain, I started getting very angry messages from her family saying that they're calling the police. My first thought was to call police right away before they do, but think I'll wait for now since it doesn't make sense for me to call just after finding the note. Unfortunately for the OP, this wasn't very convincing. The idea of his wife leaving home for shopping and then spontaneously deciding to spend days out with a friend was absurd on its own. But what made this even stranger was the fact that she didn't even try to text or call him and left a handwritten note instead. Smartphones were everywhere in 2015. Even if her own phone was dead, she could have easily borrowed her friend's. Something was not adding up, and there were two distinct possibilities. On the one hand, maybe his wife did actually leave with her friend after Saturday night shopping, but she only did so to escape OP's abusive behavior, something he claimed that he never did. On the other hand, the accusations from Reddit users were true, and OP was just desperately looking for a way to cover up his tracks. This second possibility grew even stronger when someone found an Ask Reddit post OP made that same day asking whether notes from loved ones are usually typed or handwritten. Put simply, he was likely looking for the best way to forge the note he said was from his wife. This removed a lot of doubt people had about his guilt. The OP, however, stuck to his recounting of the events from here on, and even posted long-winded stories about family drama with his in-laws. And after arguing with people on Reddit for a full day, the OP disappeared from the website. His last comment promised an update that never arrived, leaving his story without a clear end. Where he is now is unclear. Maybe it's prison if something nefarious really was going on here. But without an update or news article, we will never know for sure. On January 18, 2014, a post on r/AskReddit asked users to share the scariest situations they'd been in, moments when they weren't even sure if they would make it out alive. This post reached the front page of Reddit and received thousands of replies with people sharing stories from their time in the military, experience with car accidents, and how they felt when faced with a cruel prank from a relative. However, most of these stories paled in comparison to the disturbing account user SwiftJustice25 shared about their encounter with a creepy man in a foreign country. The comment read, "This post is very long, but I couldn't tell the whole story very well without it being this long. When I was a missionary in Brazil, my companion and I were approached by a seemingly homeless man who greeted us in almost perfect English. Turns out he was an American who had been living in Brazil for about 30 years. His name was Bickford. He had to have been in his late 50s to 60s. It was hard to tell because of his big beard and very unkempt appearance. He feigns interest in what we were peddling and asks for a copy of the Book of Mormon, but is clearly more excited to be speaking English with two Americans. We meet up with him a few times to discuss religion, but he would always meet us at the side of the road or some other public but still secluded place. We had to give weekly reports to the ecclesiastical leaders for the local unit about who we were meeting and teaching. After meeting Bickford a few times, we bring him up in our weekly meeting. The bishop and his other leaders instantly know who we are talking about and caution us to stay away from this guy. Apparently, he's a bit unstable, and once or twice a year will start bothering the missionaries. My companion and I can't believe the bishop is referring to the same person, and we continue meeting with him. I don't know how to adequately describe the creepiness of this guy. Between his disheveled appearance, flat out lying to us, and other small signs, he had a certain sinister vibe. But with nothing concrete to put our finger on, we continued to speak to him. Occasionally, he would run into us outside of the house we lived in. In one of these encounters, he invited them to his house in the jungle, all while talking about how nice and wonderful it was there. The OP and his partner reluctantly agreed and showed up at the road closest to the house. Bickford arrived a bit late and then told them to follow him into the jungle through waist-high foliage and insects. However, what they witnessed on the other side of the trail was beyond disturbing. As the OP described it, when we finally arrived at his house, my companion and I played it cool, but we couldn't believe what we were seeing. He had led us to a small clearing where there was a wooden cabin that had half collapsed on itself. He said welcome home and led us inside. There was no electricity, no running water, no utilities whatsoever. We walked in the front door frame, no door, and saw that all furniture in the house had been destroyed. Literally, someone had concentrated a large amount of effort and time to achieve this level of destruction. Chairs were unrecognizable, and there was trash everywhere. He begins showing us the main room inside the front door. That's when I noticed them. Notes, in chalk, on every square inch of the wooden walls, up the walls, on the ceiling, and a tiny frenzied scrawl. When I trained my light on the notes and started to read them, most of the notes were variations on, "Jesus will forgive me, but I have to stop. I did it again." These with the month and date written next to them. And then, the piece de resistance, the names of several children, with their ages and graphic detail about them. We tried so hard not to mention the notes. We tried so hard to ask him small talk questions about the rotting food on the stove or the 100 or so rats he kept in his basement. Anything but mentioning the notes. I can't speak for my companion, but I was freaking out. From glances at each other, I could see that he was at DEF CON 1 as well, and we decided to get out of there. We made some excuse as it was getting late that we needed to get home, and he reluctantly offered to show us the way back, on the condition that we would come visit again. As we get out of the house, he suddenly remembers that he knows a shortcut and tells us to follow him. The direction he was trying to lead us is clearly not the way back to the road. It only led deeper into the jungle. We politely declined, and luckily we were able to follow the trail that we had originally made through the underbrush. This time, however, I did not care about the spiders. When we got back onto the road and realized we were safe, we looked at each other as if to say, did that really happen? Once we started talking about what we just saw, I was so terrified that I physically could not speak. Nothing like that had ever happened to me nor since. I absolutely could not make a sound, I was so scared. My companion called our leaders who called their leaders, and we ended up moving about a week later. But not before making an entry in our area book, the book that stays in the area listing who had been talked to and who to contact in the area, warning all other missionaries to stay away from this guy. Now, this reads almost like the plot of a short horror film. The story of a deranged, possible serial killer living in the jungles of Brazil sounds almost too fictitious to be true. And the OP was quite aware of this as well, which is where the most important part of his story comes in, the recordings. As it turned out, OP, fearing for his own safety, secretly recorded many of his conversations with Bigford and posted the link to a compilation with his comment. For example, Bigford talking about the rats he raises.
You know, when I call like this, they come fast.
Oh, here they are, the rats.
Yes. 125. You can catch him and say hello. This is a female.
Do you not put the collars on all of them, or?
No, not in the old ones. These are the first. These I even leave the tails on.
Normally you clip them off.
Yes.
How come?
I have a little scissor, a pair of scissors.
Also, the notes on the wall.
Do you write yourself notes on the...
Sometimes I do.
It's neat.
I have electronic schedule. How do you call it? Electronic agent. But now it's in some form there. I wrote on every wall.
This compilation also included their last conversation with Bigford while trying to escape his house unharmed, and it played out exactly as the OP described.
Well, we better get back to our house at night here.
Okay.
It was nice to come out here to see where you live and everything.
Let me return that little rat.
Well, can you lead us back out?
Yes, of course. But there's a shorter way to out.
No, we can go out the same way that we came in. Same way is fine.
Think so?
Yeah. So come
on. Please come this way. All this way to the gate is so wet. You're going to...
It's okay, no. I'd actually prefer to go that way, because that way wasn't so bad.
Oh. I know. Well, so there's a short... You know, remember that street I told you?
Mm-hmm.
The street is closer here from this way.
Let's go.
We can pass by the same place we were 2 minutes ago. But
we can go back just the same way. That way we can learn it better.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that way we can learn it better for the next time.
All right.
Hearing this highlights the full extent of the danger OP and their partner were in. Who knows what cruel plans Bigford had for them if they had been gullible enough to follow him deeper into the woods. Fortunately, they managed to escape unharmed and lived to tell the story. Near the end of his comment, OP also mentioned that they did report Bigford to both the local and Brazilian federal police. On the 7th of February 2017, a throwaway Reddit account made a disturbing post on r/legal advice seeking help to save their unborn child. The post read, "I'm pregnant and being investigated by DCS. Hello, I'm 29 years old, happily married. My husband and I are college educated, have respectable, stable jobs, own a home in a nice neighborhood. We're basically as prepared as anyone can be to start a family. I'm almost 9 months pregnant with our first child. The problem is that 11 years ago, when my husband was a freshman in college, he was arrested for possession of marijuana. It was a large enough amount that he was charged with a Class D felony. Our jurisdiction is very harsh regarding marijuana, but not intent to deal. He pleaded guilty and did his time in probation without a problem, passing every drug test along the way. He has not touched marijuana or any other illegal substance since, and we rarely even drink and haven't at all in over a year. I have no criminal record and have never done drugs myself. It was a stupid mistake he made as a foolish 18-year-old, and he's worked hard to put it behind him. Someone has apparently contacted child services in our area and informed them that we are drug users. This accusation is being taken very seriously because of my husband's record. We have been as cooperative as we could be with our caseworker. We've been interviewed, our home has been examined, and she found nothing remotely suspicious or incriminating. We've both taken drug tests and passed. Our caseworker says that everything looks just fine so far. Unfortunately, she also says that there's still the possibility that our child could be taken from us in the labor and delivery ward, and that we won't be allowed to take her home. I was devastated and horrified to hear that. When I asked why, she said it was not up to her, and we'll have to wait and see, which made absolutely no sense to me. What gives? I feel like there's something she isn't telling me, but I have no experience with DCS, and I'm not aware of anything we could have possibly done wrong. I know they'll have to test my daughter for drugs when she's born, but she has not been exposed to drugs, nothing more than prenatal vitamins, not even Tylenol, and I already proved that by passing a drug test. I'm scared and confused. Do I need a lawyer? I have anticipated spending our savings on our new daughter/parental leave, but I will use that money for a lawyer if I have to. This was a tragic situation all around. The fear of losing their first child just minutes after birth is overwhelming enough. Not to mention the physical stress OP must have been under, which could have negatively affected her and by extension her baby's health. Most people who came across this post sympathized with the OP and tried to help the best they could. Some suggested continuing to cooperate with the authorities, while others told the OP to lawyer up as soon as they could. But for a large number of people, something about the whole situation just didn't sit right. I am a former Indiana CPS investigator/assessor. Something here is not making any sense at all, unless the law has changed greatly in the last few years when I left the department. As of this moment, you are pregnant, correct? You don't have any children. They're investigating the fetus? Former CPS worker here too. Agree with you. CPS does not investigate pregnant women with no current children. Something is not right. They urged the OP to take a closer look at the investigation, maybe even call CPS and DCS directly and inquire about the ongoing investigation. Even then, none of these commenters could have expected just how correct they would be. The truth came out on February 22nd when the OP returned with a very important update, stating, "I contacted and met with a lawyer and explained the situation to him. He seemed to agree that something was very fishy. To make a long story short, the woman handling our case has no affiliation with DCS. I'm still in complete shock. We went straight to the police. They're taking this very seriously. I can't give a lot of details because it's an ongoing investigation, but she seems to have been a very skilled/well-researched liar. I never would have known anything was amiss without the advice of this subreddit and the intervention of my attorney. I feel like a complete idiot, but the instinct to cooperate unquestioningly when faced with an intimidating authority figure is strong. I haven't had the baby yet. We're staying at a trusted family member's home until the baby is born. My OB and the hospital we'll be delivering at have already been informed of the situation and will be taking the appropriate security measures. I'm still freaking out, but we're taking every precaution for the safety of my child, and hopefully everything will turn out okay. Thanks again, everybody, truly." However, while the OP's situation had a somewhat happy ending, it's hard to imagine what would have happened if she hadn't turned to the internet for advice. Whoever this imposter was clearly did her homework. She knew about the husband's past felony and had enough legal knowledge to pose as a government worker for months without getting caught. An even scarier thought is what this imposter was planning to do once she had the newborn baby. The best case scenario would have been a legal adoption in exchange for money, but there were far worse possibilities for what could have happened to that infant. Luckily, the crisis was averted before it happened. That said, I wasn't able to find any reports of this imposter ever being identified or arrested. Having such a dangerous person still out there could be disastrous for who knows how many vulnerable families. Interestingly, while looking for reports on this individual, I came across an article about the police in Greenfield, Indiana looking for a woman who impersonated a DCS worker. This was from back in 2014, 3 years before the OP made her post. In other words, there's a possibility that the police in Greenfield were looking for the same person. Maybe she somehow avoided getting arrested and went after the OP years later. On a similar note, a 44-year-old woman named Lisa Nakrelli was arrested in June 2023 for impersonating a CPS worker and trying to kidnap a 4-year-old boy. She later claimed that she was just trying to scare the parents a little for leaving their son unattended. Fortunately, the court did not buy her excuse one bit. She is still awaiting trial, but if convicted on all charges, she's looking at up to 12.5 years in prison. This incident happened in Ohio, a neighboring state of Indiana. Put simply, there's a non-zero chance that Lisa was the very person Indiana police were searching for in 2014, and the same woman who posed as a DCS officer in front of the Reddit OP. If this is the case, she likely moved to Ohio after getting exposed in Indiana and tried pulling the same trick all over again. Though I should mention that this is nothing more than an educated guess on my part based on everything we've seen. Maybe we'll finally learn the truth when she eventually stands trial. On November 29, 2007, an anonymous 4chan user uploaded a disturbing post with the words, "If anyone can correctly guess their own post number, I will tell you where she is buried." Eerily, the post was accompanied by an image of a teenage girl. For context, on 4chan, each thread is assigned a unique post number, which is completely random and serves as an identifier for that specific post. These kinds of posts where the OP would reward other users with something if they managed to guess their exact post number were pretty common. But the rewards themselves were rarely this dark and specific. You can probably understand how the creepy nature of this particular post instantly caught the attention of so many people. It's worth mentioning that the dates and times from the screenshots shown are the archive dates and times, meaning they're not accurate. But over the following minutes after the post was made, several other users jumped in to guess their post numbers. And just 15 minutes later, a user correctly guessed theirs. After which, the OP made good on their promise and said, "Winner, here you go," and then a set of coordinates. Strangely, the coordinates pointed to a pretty random patch of trees on the side of a county road about 50 miles east of El Dorado, Kansas. But as it was later revealed, there was nothing random about the location. The girl in the image in the anonymous user's post was 18-year-old Emily Sander, a Butler Community College student who had gone missing a little less than a week before the disturbing post was made. Shockingly, the police found Sanders' partially clothed body around an hour after the coordinates were revealed at the exact coordinates provided by the user. It's important to mention that by the time the uploader revealed the coordinates on 4chan, the cops had already been investigating Emily's disappearance for a few days, and they were already zeroing in on a suspect. As the investigation had revealed, Emily had disappeared on November 23rd of that year after leaving a bar outside El Dorado with a man named Israel Mireles. According to two witnesses, Israel had bought Emily and her friends drinks at a Chinese restaurant in El Dorado before accompanying them at a bar called The Retreat. After the two left the bar, Emily was never seen alive again. Following the finding of some pretty compelling evidence of Israel's involvement in Emily's disappearance, the authorities put out a warrant for his arrest. But by then, Israel had already fled to Mexico. Fortunately, due to the severity of the crimes, the cops were able to extradite him back to Kansas for interrogation. During his testimony, the suspect claimed that after they had left the bar, he and Emily had gone back to a motel room together. According to his version of the events, at one point in the night, another man had shown up at the motel room and tried to rob him, after which he allegedly left the motel alone. When he came back a few hours later, Sanders was supposedly dead. The story is already kind of hard to believe, especially when you factor in that after allegedly finding the lifeless victim in the room, Israel claimed that he panicked, put her body in the trunk of his car, and headed to a house where his 16-year-old pregnant girlfriend was staying in nearby Baxter Springs. Again, this was already a huge stretch, and it didn't exactly help Israel's case that investigators found a large knife and clothing with his DNA in a trash can at his girlfriend's home in Baxter Springs. When it was more than obvious that Israel was responsible for the crime, a judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. As for the 4chan thread, I couldn't find any official confirmation that the post was uploaded by Israel. And it's worth mentioning that because the coordinates were revealed a little under an hour before the cops officially announced where they had found Emily, the thread could have been opened by someone on the police force who knew about the location before the public. Still, there's a very real possibility that the 4chan post was uploaded by the killer himself, adding an even more disturbing layer to an already horrific crime. On August 25, 2009, a 4chan user opened a thread with the title, "Look What I Found." The caption read, "So I was looting through some stuff my dad left when he died and I found this. The old bastard had a live grenade. It seems kinda old but looks okay to me. What would the random board do with it?" Next to the caption was an image of the OP's hand holding what appeared to be a live grenade. For the next 15 minutes, the thread was flooded with all kinds of comments from users all around the world, with some claiming that the grenade was fake and asking the uploader for proof that it was made out of real metal and wasn't just a plastic imitation. Let me see the bottom of it. Bottom. It's plastic, lol. No plastic, dimwit, it's all metal. With this comment, the OP included an image of himself holding up a lighter to a grenade, which is obviously a horrific idea. Still, it was nothing compared to what was coming. Disturbingly, some of the other commenters encouraged the poster to throw the grenade in the toilet, saying things like, "Toss in toilet, don't flush, wait for epic fountain." You would think that the OP would be able to interpret the comment as a joke, but sure enough, a few minutes later he posted another image, this time showing his hand holding the live grenade over the toilet along with the caption, should I? This is where the story gets pretty disturbing. After posting this image, the OP suddenly went silent. Over the following minutes, other commenters jumped in to ask him what he ended up doing with the grenade, but there was no response from the OP. Shortly after, a commenter uploaded a screenshot of an article that had been published by a news station in Guatemala that same day. Chillingly, the article broke the story of a 17-year-old boy named Oscar Lopez who had passed away after detonating a live grenade in the bathroom of his house. According to the article, the boy's dad had been involved in the military at some point, which explains why it was in his home. Because of the timing, most of the commenters concluded that Oscar Lopez was the OP and immediately condemned the users who encouraged him to throw the grenade in the toilet. In the weeks following the incident, several news stations from Spanish-speaking countries published the story, which brought a lot of attention to the original thread on 4chan. Over the years, the story of Oscar's grenade has been reposted all over the internet thousands of times. And it's made its way into dozens of YouTube videos covering the most disturbing incidents caused by online threads. However, through my research, I wasn't able to find the original article or anything that would indicate that the story was real. Even after spending hours searching through online archives, I found absolutely no trace of the original article, which suggests that the article could have been faked. The only articles I did find were the ones that were published after the incident and cited only the original, non-existent article as their source. It's also pretty suspicious that the article was allegedly published pretty much within an hour of the OP's last comment, which further supports the idea that the whole thing was faked. It's possible that the OP himself could have posted the photoshopped article screenshot from another account to get attention. Or that he could have made the original post and then went quiet to get a reaction from the crowd, after which another user could have jumped in to keep the story going with a fake news article. Although, it's still very possible this is real and the original article has just since been lost to time. Because the incident is over 15 years old at this point, we'll likely never know the whole truth. Back in 2009, dozens of 4chan users started to bring attention to a pretty strange phenomenon that was taking place all over the internet, in which some mysterious comments about key lime pie were cropping up on countless websites, blogs, and forums everywhere online. Although the original 4chan threads in which these discussions took place have since been deleted, I was able to find some more recent Reddit threads covering the same key lime pie phenomenon. In 2016, Reddit user KeyLimeWTF uploaded a long post about his or her investigation into the whole thing, and it read, "So, I'm just gonna throw this one out there since I haven't found anyone who's investigated or discussed this super weird, almost nonsensical mystery. To begin, I was reading a story in my local college newspaper. In fact, it was the most read article on the site. There were 3 comments on the story itself, and one of them seemed utterly strange. There's an absurd amount of references to pop culture names as well as some political names. But the subject of every line relates back to, more often than not, these things. Mrs. Anita Pelaez, Captain Coochie Pelaez, Key Lime Pie, some Coochie's Restaurant, North Carolina near the Biltmore Estate, Key West, Florida. And not every post is exactly the same, but some are. Some reference weird pop culture icons, while some just seem to be weird out-of-place pie recipes. The oldest post we found was from 2009, with the most recent being an awful TMZ story. Super weird, but if you were to Google or research those names associated with key lime pie, what you would discover is that this has been posted all over US media sites. A couple of things here that we discovered down the rabbit hole. Kuchi's Key West Bar and Grill existed in one way or another. It's listed on local eatery websites and Google Maps, but there's really no information as to what exactly it was. The majority of the posts we found were done by a Jake Carson, a fake name, or by celebrity/political figures. Nothing totally makes sense, yet everything is related. Also, who would go through this much trouble for something as ridiculous as key lime pie for a restaurant that isn't real? I found that pretty much everything the OP was talking about in their post was perfectly true. There are indeed thousands upon thousands of strange comments and reviews about Captain Kuchi's key lime pies on countless random websites. And a lot of these comments have appeared on sites that have absolutely nothing to do with pie, such as this extremely long and somewhat inappropriate comment that was posted on a memorial site for a woman from San Jose who passed away at 74. As I also found, a lot of these comments are posted in articles and blogs revolving around suggestive content, such as this other one that appears in an article about a dating show. It reads, "That Captain Kuchi Pelaez of Cucharidaville over in Asheville, North Carolina sure enough is one wild and crazy guy. All the women are so wild about him and his famous cheeseburgers and key lime pies." But even though these comments are definitely weird, these are just 2 of thousands of accounts that have been created to post these comments everywhere online. As you might have noticed, the phrasing of these rants seem to follow a bit of a pattern. In pretty much all of the comments, almost all the words have been capitalized where they shouldn't be, and the poster always signs off in the same way, with 3 dots after the last word, followed by a fake name. I found that these comments have also been made on random Facebook posts. As you might have guessed, a bunch of people over the years have reached out to these Facebook accounts, and the responses they've gotten have been pretty disturbing, as you can see in this 2016 Reddit thread. The post reads, "I decided to send Kuchi Pelaez a message and ask him when the world can know who Captain Kuchi is. I didn't expect a reply, but roughly a month later Kuchi replied, 'There's just no medicine like an all-natural key lime pie made from scratch.' Plus a bunch of other garbled nonsense about key lime pie. After a little bit of back and forth, the user asked Captain Kuchi for the address of the restaurant, and this was the response they got. 'Close your eyes, let your ears listen to the radio. Do you hear my voice? Can you hear your own soul scream? Let me choose. My voice that predicts the future or your tormented reach. What do you choose? You can choose. Your life, your future.' As smart as you are, you may have already found out that the radio drama from 75 years ago was the truth. They are on our planet, and they watch and see everything. Don't trust anyone. Don't trust the police. They are already controlled by them." And a few more lines of paranoid ranting. Strangely, the original message was sent in Swedish, which is the Reddit user's native language. What makes this disturbing is that there was nothing on the user's profile indicating that their first language was Swedish, which indicates that Captain Kuchi could have stalked the user. And eerily, this wasn't the only time this happened. Whenever people reached out to these accounts to ask for information about the key lime pie phenomenon, they would often receive strange responses with very specific information about their lives that the key lime pie people had no reason to know. The rabbit hole in this mystery goes pretty deep, but some things have been confirmed to be true. For example, as mentioned in the Key Lime WTF's Reddit post, Kuchi's Key West Bar and Grill was a real place in Asheville, North Carolina. According to dozens of Reddit users, the original owners were Oswald C. Pelaez, aka Kuchi, and his wife Anita Pelaez. But interestingly, even though the random comments and reviews are almost all about pie, the restaurant was actually known for its burgers. Still, despite this information, it's hard to understand where the connection is between the restaurant and the 15-year-long campaign to flood the internet with strange reviews about their key lime pies. Over the years, this has led thousands of people all over the internet to come up with all kinds of theories to explain the phenomenon. The first theory is that all of the comments and reviews are coming from a single poster. Technically, this is a possibility. I mean, it's not uncommon for people with extreme obsessive personalities to become fixated on something as random as key lime pie and dedicate years to spreading bizarre content across the internet. However, the sheer volume of posts, accounts, and languages involved makes this kind of hard to believe. If you think about it, this would require the poster to individually open and verify thousands and thousands of sub-accounts, which would require a ton of different email addresses and more time than we can imagine. This is why a lot of people have suggested that all of these comments could be coming from a bot. The fact that all the comments are written in a similar style makes this a possibility, but there's one major caveat here. Over the past couple of decades, Google has really cracked down on bot accounts, making it increasingly difficult for random bots to open accounts and post comments on random blogs and sites. And sure, this could be a pretty advanced bot that's been updated over the years to beat Google's security measures, but there's really very little motive for anyone to take the time to design something like this. So, in the absence of a solid explanation, some slightly more disturbing theories have been proposed by the online community. According to one of the most popular ones, these comments could be a coded method of communication for some sort of cult or underground organization with nefarious purposes. This could explain the endless, seemingly random pop culture references and indecipherable strings of garbled text with random capitalization. I also found some Reddit comments where the users alleged that Coochie's Key West Bar and Grill was being used as a cover-up for something more sinister. For example, in 2017, a user posted a comment saying, "I grew up in Arden and drove by it nearly every day of my life and never once saw more than one car there. When I reached my 20s, I assumed it was a money laundering operation or something similar. A friend of mine actually ate there once many years ago. If I recall correctly, it was empty and the food was unremarkable. It had never occurred to me to do the same." This is honestly just one of those mysteries that you could make an entire documentary series about and you'd still barely be scratching the surface. To this day, nobody really knows where all these comments are coming from, who's posting them, and why or even how many people are involved in this whole campaign. And considering how deep the rabbit hole goes with this one, we can safely assume that it'll probably stay that way for a long time. On Christmas Day 2014, an anonymous 4chan user opened a pretty disturbing thread with the words, "I bought a Wii U, but it was broken, so I opened the Wii U, and this thing was inside. What is this?" Next to the captions, the user uploaded a couple of images of some sort of brown, oval-shaped object inside the console. At first glance, the OP thought it was probably something an animal had left in there, but a few minutes later, he followed up with some images that looked like something straight out of a nightmare. Apparently, the brown object was some sort of spider nest, and as soon as the OP cracked it open, it looked like this. A few minutes later, the poster commented, "At least the spiders are already dead. Whatever happened, it's an egg opened too soon or an egg that never managed to open. The spiders must have devoured each other to stay alive and eventually grew to max capacity and truly died. The size shows they're adults, but the color shows they literally have no plating or skin." 3 minutes later, the OP gave a chilling update saying, "This one was still alive." And this is where the thread starts to get a little disturbing. Just a few seconds later, another user commented on the post saying, "Okay, I googled it for you, OP. That's a dirt dauber nest. The spiders are paralyzed inside of it. If they're not dead by now and they're actually fresh catches, they're gonna be waking up soon." And responding to the image of the live spider the OP posted, the user warned, "This spider kind of looks like a brown recluse. If you let it sting you, your arm is going to start rotting while you're alive." Responding to the original picture of the spiders, another user commented, "By the looks of it, the last one just woke up, and the dirt dauber might not even have started laying its larvae yet. If that's the case, these might all just be paralyzed. Also, I'm afraid for OP's life, since the spider that did wake up looks like a brown recluse, and if that's actually the case, the OP has a dirt dauber nest full of brown recluses. He's in for one hell of a ride." Over the next several minutes, dozens of other users jumped in the chat to warn the OP not to provoke the spiders under any circumstances. Fortunately, shortly after, the OP posted a final update to the thread saying, "OP here, they weren't dead and they started to move. I ran out of my house and called the exterminator. I'm posting from my cell phone." It's pretty disturbing to think that a nest of poisonous spiders could be growing inside of one of your consoles without you knowing it. And according to another commenter, it's actually pretty common for dirt daubers to do this. Thankfully, it looks like the OP was okay. In March 2020, an anonymous 4chan user posted an image of a missing girl named Lisa Irwin, along with a set of coordinates that point to a random location in the middle of the trees somewhere in Lakeside Village, Kansas. For context, Lisa had gone missing in October 2011 when she was just a 10-month-old baby. That day, Jeremy Irwin, Lisa's dad, came back from work at 4 a.m. and immediately called the cops when he saw his daughter was missing from her crib. Disturbingly, he mentioned to his wife Deborah that the front door was unlocked and that 3 cell phones were missing. During the investigation, a bunch of really strange things started happening, and it was hard for the cops to make sense of anything. Even though some witnesses had reported seeing a strange man carrying a baby wearing a diaper near the area where Lisa had gone missing, they didn't have enough evidence to arrest a particular suspect. Surveillance video from the area showed a man dressed in white leaving a wooded area near the Irwins' house at 2:30 a.m., but the suspect the cops brought in as a result of the footage had rock-solid alibis. Chillingly, when the cops searched the Irwins' house that same year, dogs picked up the scent of a dead body in Deborah's bedroom. When the authorities confronted her about it, she claimed she didn't initially look for her daughter because she was afraid of what she might find. This was just the first in a series of strange claims and contradictions that Lisa's mom would find herself in. Later, she would allege that the last time she had seen her baby, it had been around 10:30 p.m. But after, she confessed that she had been drinking with a friend and didn't remember when the last time she saw her daughter was. Investigators also accused Deborah of failing a lie detector test, and even her own best friend told the police that Deborah had a dark side and that she believed she could have been responsible for the disappearance of her own daughter. Strangely, the cops later found that one of the 3 cell phones that were taken from the house had made a 50-second call late on the night Lisa went missing. But both Deborah and Jeremy denied making the call. When the cops investigated the call, they found that it had been made to a Kansas City woman named Megan Wright. Interestingly, Megan had once been in a relationship with a suspect in the case, a drifter who lived in a halfway house close to the Irwins. Still, she denied being the one who had picked up the phone on the night of Lisa's disappearance. To this day, the cops are convinced that whoever made that call is responsible for whatever happened to Lisa, but in the absence of new evidence, the case went cold for a very long time. The image you see in the 4chan thread is actually an age-progressed picture released by the authorities to help the public identify the victim, and it shows what Lisa would have looked like at 7 years old. As soon as the user posted the coordinates, some of the commenters started suspecting that the OP was the perpetrator, and that the coordinates pointed to the location in the middle of the woods where Lisa's body was located. One user commented, "I just emailed this thread to 2 local NBC affiliates in Kansas that cover the Thompsonville and Oskaloosa area. Hopefully this is legit and we can finally do some good and bring peace to a family." But even though a lot of people got in touch with the police over the leaked coordinates, frustratingly, nothing really came of them. And it's unclear if the cops just didn't investigate the coordinates, or if they did but they didn't find anything there. To this day, Lisa's disappearance has created more questions than answers. Was it the guy who was seen in the surveillance footage? Was it the parents? Or the 4chan user? We'll likely never know. As you probably know, one of the most popular features of 4chan was that it allowed its users to stay completely anonymous, which was part of the culture of the forum. Still, some users chose to have a username to put more weight behind their words and engage in genuine social interactions with others. This was the case with user UTV, who was very active on the 4chan sports board back in the day, a highly aggressive sports fan in an online board. But there was one thing that made UTV's post stand out in the sea of 4chan threads. Strangely, UTV had a secret admirer, an anonymous user who tracked, archived, and followed every single one of UTV's posts and comments across more than 250 threads. Whenever UTV posted anything, the anonymous user would archive his posts, comment on them, and summarize his activities with perfect precision. At first, it was kind of funny, and it seemed like the user was just a troll who liked to mess with UTV for no particular reason. And it seemed like the trolling had the desired effect, as UTV would often blurt out some pretty aggressive comments at the anonymous user, frustrated with the level of obsession the user had developed towards him. In one thread, UTV commented, "Archiving my posts in here is one thing, but you're actually stalking me in other threads too. Get a life." After weeks of stalking and obsessing over UTV's every move, the user earned himself the nickname The Archiver from other board members who found his activities hilarious. Unfortunately for UTV, the more he engaged with the Archiver, the more the Archiver would obsess over logging, categorizing, summarizing, praising, and decorating his posts. And like I said, at first it was kind of funny, especially if you were just a random 4chaner watching the whole thing develop from a distance. But after a few weeks, the plot took a pretty creepy turn. In July 2013, the Archiver was no longer satisfied with simply logging the posts, so he started composing songs and poems based on UTV's interests and personality, including a limerick that read, "There was once a young Phil from Kent who loved to call Frodo an ent. He bet against Villa in a 3-1 thriller. They lost and his money was sent." It's worth noting that UTV's real name was actually Phil, meaning the Archiver had started finding out more and more personal information about him as time went on. Over the following weeks, the Archiver progressed from songs and poems to other kinds of worship and obsession, which included making ink blot tests featuring UTV's posts, as well as designing detailed floor plans for the home he would like to live in if he and UTV ever moved in together. He even made preparations for UTV's funeral with detailed instructions for his family to follow on the day of the ceremony. The madness continued for several weeks until on October 7, the archiver made his final post about UTV in the TRB board saying, "I have been with UTV for 255 threads. This is the last one. My parents have discovered my UTV works and they have insisted I remove everything of the type from my computer and be done with it. They will be monitoring my activities now to ensure I cannot do it anymore. This is my final message. I'm sorry to UTV and I hope he sees this and understands. I have one more gift to share with him. This 97-page document contains every personal work I've created that involves UTV in any way. It is for him. I do not want anyone else to read it. However, I cannot stop you from doing so." As the entire internet soon found out, the archiver wasn't lying about the document. He literally compiled an almost 100-page PDF featuring everything he had written and designed over almost 5 months of insane obsession over a random dude on 4chan. The Phil Marillion, as the archiver titled the document, contained detailed information about Phil's posts, his interests, and his interactions with the archiver. On the front page, an explanation for the document reads, "Why am I doing this? Because UTV is my passion, my hobby, and my social life. I love him, and I love archiving his posts. Archiving his posts isn't enough. They are my bread and butter, but this is the salt and pepper on the sandwich that spices it up." The rest of the 97-page document is about as crazy as you'd expect from a guy who spent all his waking hours stalking another guy on 4chan. It contains detailed stories and fantasies involving the archiver and UTV, a detailed plan to make UTV like him more, pictures of inventions and gadgets the archiver designed using snippets of UTV's posts, an incredibly dark and meticulously planned blueprint to abduct UTV and hold him hostage for £40 million. And so much more stuff that you can't even imagine. When the archiver shared his masterwork, Phil responded only with a question mark and then vanished forever from 4chan. To this day, the internet still doesn't know what to make of the archiver or his motivations behind obsessing over a stranger to such an insane degree. Some allege mental illness, others think the archiver just genuinely loved Phil. But whatever the case, the PDF served as a wake-up call to be careful who you talk to or give information about yourself online, because you never really know what they're doing with it.